Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you with the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. Coming up, monkeypox has become a threat to public health, and now many are concerned about how this disease is being linked to members of the LGBTQ community. A professor of epidemiology and medicine at Columbia Mailman School of Public Health joins me to discuss this outbreak. Why is monkeypox being linked to the LGBTQ community? After that, inflation may have a unique effect on vulnerable populations that are already struggling with food insecurity, making it even more difficult for families to afford food. Joining me to discuss the effect inflation has on food insecurity is the Director of Advocacy, Policy, and Research for Hunger Free America. How are food assistance programs being affected by inflation? Then, Black Americans continue to struggle with racial bias in regards to home ownership. Joining me to discuss the racial inequities with NYC Home Ownership is a senior program manager for the Black Homeownership Project. How will this organization combat this steady decline? And finally, New York Edge aims to make a difference in the lives of youth in underserved communities. The CEO of the organization joins me for a discussion on the importance of accessibility in education. How does New York Edge help youth strengthen their academic success? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. What was once considered a rare virus is now a public health emergency in our country. In just a few months, monkeypox has become an imminent threat to public health, and now many are concerned about the effect this will have on members of the LGBTQ community. Joining me to discuss some misconceptions about the virus and the disproportionate impact the outbreak has had on the LGBTQ community is Dr. Wafaa El-Sad of Columbia University. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Now, can you first explain what is monkeypox or what monkeypox is?
Yes, certainly. I think monkeypox is a virus that we've known about for several decades, actually. It is not a new virus. So it's been reported, although in rare conditions, in several African countries in Central and West Africa. So it is what we have called an endemic virus that's been reported for years and years and years in small outbreaks in these African countries. Now, over the years, we've had very small, limited outbreaks of monkeypox infections in other countries around the world, but these have been limited in size and also limited to one specific location or another.
Now, I really like to know, how does it affect our bodies and our health?
Yes, I think the important to keep in mind that this virus is transmitted usually by what we call close physical contact, meaning close skin-to-skin contact. Somebody who, for example, touches the rash or the sores in somebody who does have monkeypox, and the infection is transmitted in that manner, through skin-to-skin contact largely. That's what we know now. There may be other means of transmission. I can talk about that later on, but that's the major way of transmission. And then once the virus, the person is exposed, and if they become infected, then they develop some manifestations of the infection itself. This may be in the form of a fever, aches, pains, swollen glands, for example, in the neck or elsewhere. And then it's accompanied by the appearance of a rash and sores that look characteristic of monkeypox. Now, what we know is that for the majority of people who do get infected and do develop monkeypox, fortunately, it tends to be a self-limited infection. It tends to be not very severe, and usually people will recover on their own. But in a subset of individuals, they can have severe symptoms of monkeypox, including severe pain, and so on and so forth. And that then may require actual treatment to allay the symptoms as well as to treat the virus itself.
Now, since the start of the outbreak, or I guess since the outbreak started gaining some momentum, monkeypox has been linked to homosexuality. Can you just explain, why we were seeing that?
I think we have to be very careful not to say that this infection, monkeypox, is linked to homosexuality. We know, and certainly we've known for, and I always say this, viruses do not discriminate. Viruses are transmitted as viruses, and nobody is immune from an infection with a specific virus. So I think that's very important because we really want to avoid stigmatization of a specific population. What we've seen with this latest outbreak that's happening now globally in now more than 70 countries around the world, with large numbers of cases, much more than we used to see in the past, is that the population that appears to be most severely impacted at present are men who have sex with men. But that does not mean that others are immune from getting infected. Nonetheless, I think what we have to do now is to focus on the people most vulnerable to monkeypox and try to disseminate information so people can protect themselves, and also so that people who are at risk and may have a rash or a symptom that suggests monkeypox, that they immediately seek attention so diagnosis can be made and they can get the attention that they need.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, because there has been a lot of confusion about that. So I really appreciate you, setting the record straight on that. Now, there has also been some confusion around whether or not monkeypox is an STD or not. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think that's also something that we're learning. We don't know for sure whether this virus is a sexually transmitted infection, STI, or not. But what we know is that because, as I mentioned, it's transmitted through close skin to skin contact, that obviously can occur in any intimate setting, including during sex. So that is the reason that we've noticed that certainly people who've gotten the monkeypox infection appear to have had it through close contact, sexual contact with a person with monkeypox. And also, the other reason is that some of the rash that we've noticed in this current outbreak, the rash has been localized around the genital and anal area. So that's important for people to keep in mind so they don't mistake some of the rash from monkeypox with, for example, rash from syphilis or rash from herpes and so on.
Thank you so much for stating that, because I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. How can you tell the difference? Because I know some people online are saying, like, even if they get like an acne or something, like they just don't know how to tell the difference. How can people tell the difference, and what should they look out for?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, this infection can mimic so many other entities and so many other infections. That's why I think I advise that someone develops a new rash, a new source, please go and get checked. It doesn't hurt. And there's a test. There's a test that can be done that can demonstrate whether it's monkeypox or something else completely, so that the person get the right treatments for the infection that they have. So I would say that have a high index of suspicion for any new rash, any new source, and go and seek attention with your primary care provider or a clinic that's nearby, so that you can, allay your anxiety and you can be sure that it is not monkeypox, because the rash can be can be characteristic, but it can also look like a pimple. It can be look like what you can see with other infections. The characteristic rash is one where you see a small vesicle, means like a bubble that contains fluid inside, and the fluid is pus. So these little pus containing rash is pretty characteristic of monkeypox. But nonetheless, we have seen rash with monkeypox that looks like a simple rash and does not look like the classic appearance. There also are people who don't manifest monkeypox by a skin rash, but rather they have ulcers in the mouth, or they may have ulcers around the anus or ulcers inside the rectum. So we have to be also aware if you have trouble swallowing, or you have pain in the mouth, or you have severe pain or ulcers around the anus or rectum, that this could be monkeypox. And please go and again seek attention.
Now, there has been an increased effort to make sure males in the LGBT community are protecting themselves, but this has been met with a mixed response. And as you mentioned, some are worried about the stigma that it can, just can come up with all of this. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, I do think that part of our responsibility, our collective responsibility, is to fight stigma and discrimination at all costs. I know, as someone who's practiced infectious disease for many, many decades, is that many infections, unfortunately, are associated with stigma and discrimination. And this is the last thing you want to do, because what happens is then that drives people to not seek the protection that they need. It may drive people from seeking the vaccines that we have at hand. It may drive people from trying to go and get a diagnosis done, or it may drive people from getting treatment that they need. So it's absolutely critical that we fight stigma and discrimination vigorously, because it is so vital to trying to stem the spread of this virus. So I think for the population that is now at highest risk, and I'm very careful to say at this point in time, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but the population that's at risk at this point in time, it's vitally important that, again, is to, if you're at risk and you belong to the LGBTQ community, particularly if you're a man having sex with men, is to please seek vaccination. We know that the vaccines are very promising and can hopefully protect someone from getting infection, and most importantly, probably can prevent from getting severe monkeypox infection. So seeking vaccination is very, very critical. And like I said, again, in addition, if you have anything that may look like monkeypox or feel or you don't feel well, do seek care, because there are tests that can make the diagnosis, and then you can be guided to getting the care that you need.
So, in our city, monkeypox vaccines are available. Can you just explain who is eligible for one at this time? Because I know there's also a lot of confusion around that.
Yes, so vaccines are available. We're fortunate in New York City, although the supply is still limited. We have demand up here and we have a supply down here. So we are, and I'm hopeful that over the next week or so, we will see our supply increase so can meet the demand that we're seeing now in the community. So it's very reassuring that there's high demand for the vaccine. Um, who is eligible for the vaccines? There are priority groups, and I can list them. Number one is anyone who's had contact with a person with suspected or confirmed monkeypox. That's a very important priority. If you've had contact with someone with monkeypox, uh, you should seek vaccination as soon as possible. Ideally, within even 5 days of vaccine of the contact is recommended. So that's number one. Number two, it's also recommended for other men who have sex with men who are at this point at risk for monkeypox, and they are eligible as well for getting vaccinated, particularly those who have had either anonymous or multiple sex partners in the past, 2 to 4 weeks or so. So those are the two priority populations for now, because of the supply shortage, the limited supply that we have at hand. So I would say I would encourage strongly people who fit into those categories to please make sure that you are at the front of the line when there are appointments available for getting vaccinated.
Now, can you quickly let us know for those who aren't eligible, how can they protect themselves against this virus?
I think that it's there are ways to protect oneself. I think, for example, if you are you know somebody who may have monkeypox, or you think has monkeypox, or they believe they have monkeypox, to try to please not have close contact with such an individual. That's really important, and that by that I mean by touch, skin to skin, any intimate or sexual relationship should be avoided with someone with suspected monkeypox. We also, as well, advise against sharing, for example, towels or bed sheets or clothes with someone who has suspected monkeypox or is confirmed with monkeypox. So those are the ways, the two ways that we think are important to avoid getting exposed to monkeypox and potentially getting infected with it.
All right, doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. Becoming a main concern in our country, inflation is affecting nearly every part of our daily lives. However, inflation may have a unique effect on vulnerable populations already struggling with food insecurity. Joining me to discuss the effect inflation has on these vulnerable populations and their access to food is Emilio Tavarez, Director of Advocacy, Policy, and Research at Hunger Free America. Emilio, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about your organization, Hunger Free America?
Yeah, so we started out as the New York City Coalition Against Hunger over 10 years ago, and we changed our name about 6 years ago to Hunger Free America to take more of a national approach. So we're both a direct service and advocacy nonprofit organization. So we are nonpartisan. Our direct services include SNAP and WIC outreach, which I'm sure we'll touch on. But we also manage the National Hunger Hotline on behalf of the Department of Agriculture. And then in terms of advocacy, we focus on these programs and making them better. The scale of help that federal programs can provide versus charitable efforts is exponential. It's like about 17 times more assistance. So I'm proud to work here. I'm a social worker. I have tons of experience helping people apply for these programs directly, and I'm excited to share more information with your public.
Now, I love that you mentioned that your organization decided to take a more national approach because hunger really is a problem. I mean, globally, but definitely in this country, people will be surprised to know that so many Americans are going hungry. Can you explain what's the history behind the struggle many Americans are facing with hunger?
Yeah, and to give you some context, to put some numbers on that, there's about 38 million Americans right now nationwide facing food insecurity. And in New York City, it's about 1.1 million, or like 13% of the population, pretty much. So it's a widespread issue, and it was a widespread issue even before the pandemic. The reality is that wages just don't go far enough. Like they're not high enough to be livable, particularly in a high cost area such as New York City. And now, inflation is here, or it's always been around, but like the cost of rent, healthcare costs, childcare, food, transportation, right? Like there's so many different costs that are all going up that it makes it that much harder for people to eat. I think one of the things is that that affects people is that food is one thing you can cut, right? Like some people can say like, paying rent is more important, so I'm going to skip these meals, right? Like you can't really do that with other costs. And so the other side of poverty and hunger is that people also have a lot of health issues because of it, right? Like if you're skipping meals or you don't have enough money to buy healthier food, right? Like you have too many mouths to feed. And so you want to stretch that dollar out as much as you can. I think all of those are barriers to help getting people out of food insecurity.
I really like that you mentioned that because I never thought of it that way before, how people will sometimes just decide, okay, well, maybe I can skip a meal or, I never thought of it that way. Can you tell me a little bit more or has this been something that you've seen, throughout your work?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the difference between, getting evicted and like spending a night with a hungry belly, right? Particularly with parents, households with children, we know that they do, the parents will stop eating to make sure that their kids are fed. And so they try to protect them in that way. But then the parent, has all these health issues that may prevent them from working. And then B, they may think that they're, sort of shielding their children from the emotional aspect of being poor, but we know from research that children know. Like if my dad is skipping a meal, like the children can tell or they notice. They can see that the fridge is empty, right? If they want a snack and they go looking and can't find anything, like there's a lot of different ways that it shows up. And so, I'm going to go hungry or my kids are going to go hungry, but at least we have a roof over our head, or, my kids need, their computers for school. So I'm going to skip a meal so I can pay the light bill. So I think there's a lot of these negotiations that people have to make that are really stressful.
Now, as you mentioned, cost is a major component as to why people don't have access to food, and this is often categorized as food insecurity. Can you tell me more about how NYC is struggling with food insecurity?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, it's about 1.1 million New York City residents right now. About 12% of the city, 12 to 13%, is estimated. And so it's a major issue. You would think that in New York City, we do have a lot of extra sort of programs to help people, low income people. There's like a childcare subsidy. There's like a, subsidy for Metro cards, right? There's like rental assistance. But the issue is that there's so many people in need that these programs don't have the bandwidth, the capacity to really help everybody. SNAP and WIC are federal programs, so they have the ability, SNAP in particular has the ability to expand with needs. So there's never the fear of like, oh, like it's going to run out of money, right? But with a lot of these other programs, WIC included, there is that sort of cap. And so another issue is that people just don't know. There's a lack of awareness about all these programs, right? Like I only learned it as I was, helping people apply, navigating different websites. So, some people can navigate a website fairly easily on their own, but a lot of people can't, right? Because of lack of education, not enough experience with technology. And so there's a lot of outreach that is still needed to connect people with the available resources.
Now, according to some of your earlier research, the Bronx remained New York City's hungriest borough, which unfortunately isn't a surprise to many of us. The Bronx struggles the most out of all of the boroughs. Can you explain, what could be some factors that are contributing to those numbers?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of layered factors. And I'm a very transparent guy, so I'm just going to go ahead and say that I think the root of it is just structural racism. The Bronx is known to be a high concentration borough of immigrant communities, Latinx communities. And I'm actually coming at you from the Bronx right now. I live in the Bronx. And so there's a disinvestment in those communities, right? Like people focus more on Manhattan as sort of like the city, and transportation out here is really tough. Getting to a food pantry or soup kitchen or going to a government office can involve like 2 buses and a train. And so imagine carrying like heavy bags of groceries on 2 buses and a train to your home. There's not as many nonprofit organizations or government offices in the Bronx as other parts of the city. But also I think there's a stigma associated with seeking help, and that is particularly prevalent among immigrant communities. The biggest thing I hear is like, I'm an immigrant, so I'm not eligible, which may or may not be true depending on the program you're talking about. Like SNAP is eligible for many immigrants, and WIC doesn't even have an immigration requirement. But from the community's perspective, it's like, oh, I don't want to be a burden, or there's people who need it more than I do. So there's all these sort of excuses for why also people don't seek out help. So I think it's both a structural problem, like we need more services, more transportation for the Bronx and Brooklyn in particular as well, the outer boroughs really, and as well as, we need to do more outreach so that people have the right information and will take advantage of what's available.
I can also add to that. I think a lot of people have like too much pride, and they don't want to feel like they're accepting a handout, and they want to, I came here and I did this. So I can definitely understand where you're coming from and what you're saying right there. Now, some families are fortunate to rely on benefits like SNAP and WIC that are available. Can you explain how those families are also affected by inflation?
Yeah, and to your point, I think part of what people don't realize about that pride issue is that this is why we pay taxes, right? Like our tax dollars are going to fund these programs. And so everybody that works, most households on SNAP and WIC are working households, right? Often they have like 3 or 4 jobs and none of them pay enough. And so inflation, impacts those households because they are working, right? And even if they are getting benefits, the cost of everything else is going up, so their benefits don't go as far. Particularly, through the pandemic, there's been enhanced benefits, new programs like pandemic EBT for households with children in public schools. But what I've heard from community members in the Bronx is that even though there were higher level benefits, inflation costs made it almost like nullified them in a way, right? Like the benefits went up, but every other cost went up, and so many people didn't notice the difference. The tax credits, like the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit, I think had a higher impact. So people did notice that a lot more. Were able to save or pay medical costs, like think a little bit more long term with that. But all of these programs are temporary. And so we're already seeing, benefit cliffs impacting people where they're losing, whatever subsidies they had, or they have to sort of, like school meals now, right? Like, am I getting reduced price meals? Is it free for everybody? So there's a lot of uncertainty that inflation is also sort of exacerbating into a lot of, hardship.
Now, SNAP and WIC are government-funded programs. How should they respond to what's going on with inflation in our country?
So I think a lot of the changes that were made during the pandemic should be made permanent, right? They increased the benefit amounts for households. Eligibility was loosened a little bit for college students. Can you believe college students, if they were studying full time, were also required to at least work 20 hours a week to qualify for SNAP? And so there's a lot of rules like that make no sense, because if you're going to school, you should have a program to help you, pay for your food while you do that. And so pandemic EBT is something that has been extended, but it should just be a permanent program. And so a lot of the improvements that we saw during the pandemic were improvements we needed long before now, flexibilities with the interviews, with the work requirements, more virtual services. A lot of people, like I mentioned before, just can't travel to the office, right? So being able to take pictures on your cell phone of your documents and submitting them to whatever app or website was required, I think is a lot easier for a lot of people. But also we will always need in-person services, particularly for people who are not tech savvy. So like older adults who may not be as familiar with a smartphone. Or also what I think a lot about is people who are homeless, who are houseless, whatever word you want to use, but don't have a permanent home, may also not have internet access or a smart device, right? Or minutes on their phone. So there's a lot of we want to provide service to everybody in whatever way is most comfortable to them. And I think the other thing is that people spend a lot of time sharing the same information with multiple programs. So for example, SNAP and WIC basically have similar eligibility, right? Income guidelines, where do you live, permanent address, who's in your household. And so it's up to the client to provide their documents to each agency separately, whereas we think they should submit their application and documents once and get all the services that they're eligible for, so that they can save time and money that they can spend on other things.
Now, can you just let everybody know how they can stay up to date with Hunger Free America and all the resources you provide?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to our website, hungerfreeamerica.org. We have the Hunger Hotline, which is it's on our website. Sorry, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but basically we have SNAP and WIC enrollers that help people remotely. So if you want to talk to someone and just find out if you might be eligible, you can give us a call. Also, we have a couple of field offices, one in the Bronx on Sheridan Avenue and one in Queens, which will be closed for the month of August, but will reopen in September. And so Hunger Free USA is our Twitter handle. We provide updates on all these federal changes to these programs, as well as changes to our services. So please feel free to reach out to us.
All right. Emilio, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you all for your time, and hope to see you soon.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. For decades, Black Americans struggled with racial bias in regards to home ownership. This continues to be a struggle for many Black Americans, as the Bronx Times reports Black home ownership in New York City is on a 20-year decline. Joining me to dissect the racial inequities within NYC home ownership and solutions to help mitigate this problem is Sabrina Bazile, Senior Program Manager of the Black Homeownership Project. Sabrina, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about your organization, the Black Homeownership Project?
Yeah, the Black Homeownership Project is an initiative from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, which aims to grow Black wealth and increase the number of Black homeowners in New York City and provide high quality services for Black homeowners. We offer support with estate planning services, foreclosure prevention, landlord services, home repair and maintenance. And as part of this project, we just launched Generation to Generation program to assist with estate planning, preserving and growing intergenerational Black wealth in Black households across New York City. And this program will increase awareness of estate planning services and provide free estate planning for low-income Black homeowners. And this is what I want to talk about today.
Now, Black home ownership in New York City has been on a decline over the past few decades, and home ownership has been an ongoing issue for many Black Americans. For those who don't know, can you give us a little background on the severity of this issue?
Yeah, so our research and conversations with Black homeowners, landlords, brokers, and housing counselors have shown a loss of Black homeowners due to existing structural and intentionally discriminatory racist housing practices and policies that have worked to strip and threaten Black households of intergenerational wealth. And actually in March of 2021, the Black Homeownership Project found that the number of Black households in NYC declined by 13%. Over the past 20 years due to unsustainable and predatory mortgage practices, skyrocketing prices, and adverse financial impacts from deed theft, scams, and tax liens. And as we know, Black homeowners have been historically left out of housing policies that have benefited their white counterparts that were disproportionately affected by the Great Recession, redlining, and of course the ongoing COVID pandemic and resulting economic instability has only exacerbated these systemic issues.
Now, when we talk about a decline in Black home ownership, are these people losing their homes, or is everyone else gaining more and maybe Black Americans are staying the same?
It's people losing their homes because of predatory actors specifically targeting Black homeowners. We're seeing both from a system of predatory tax liens. These are, unpaid property taxes, water bills that are sold to third party that disproportionately occur in Black communities. But we're also seeing deed theft. These are practices that aim to take title of someone's home without them realizing. But we're seeing these predatory and aggressive tactics that work to strip and threaten Black wealth and Black homeownership and ultimately make Black homeowners and make owning a home difficult. And so we're seeing the rate of Black homeownership staying the same over the years, but at the same time, we're losing Black homeowners. We're seeing a decline in Black households, and that is due to predatory practices, tax liens, deed theft, and scams that disproportionately target Black households and lead to a loss of property and equity.
So you talked a lot about, a lot of these predatory practices, and you're mentioning that they actually are targeting Black households. Can you go into detail a little bit more about what those practices are?
Yeah, so as I said, these predatory and aggressive tactics and practices that disproportionately target Black homeowners through tax liens, foreclosures, deed theft scams, also through aggressive and harassing calls for all cash buyouts. You may see the signs on buildings, for all cash. We take, all cash homes that are usually undervalued. But these tactics and practices work to, again, strip and undermine on the large scale Black wealth, because they're aggressive, they're harassing, they're targeting vulnerable Black homeowners. They're keeping a home difficult. They're predatory, and it's not by accident. They stem from structural and intentionally racist policies that at its core make homeownership for Black New Yorkers difficult.
Now, the Center for New York City Neighborhoods found that areas with a higher proportion of Black and Hispanic homeowners have lower home values, even if the age and square footage of their properties are the same. Can you tell me more about how Black and Hispanic New Yorkers are affected by these racial disparities?
Ultimately, it's racism. It's the history of structurally and intentionally racist and discriminatory housing practices and policies that threaten Black and Hispanic households of generational wealth. And it's something that Black and Brown household homeowners and renters have been dealing with for forever. It's the legacy of racist housing practices, especially redlining and predatory lending, that have led to the Great Recession and have made it impossible for many Black and Hispanic families across the U.S. To have the opportunity to tap into the equity building benefits of homeownership. And so that's what we're doing through Generation to Generation, is providing awareness of estate planning and free estate planning services for low-income Black homeowners, with the goal of preserving that equity and combating the predatory actors, and increasing awareness of deed theft and kind of that equity stripping that we've seen throughout history, and combating that ongoing cycles, or that history of the ongoing cycles of real estate speculation and displacement.
Now, the racial wealth gap comes up a lot in these conversations. Can you explain how home ownership is linked to generational wealth? Because unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people understand how they're connected.
I mean, the racial wealth gap is tied to the history of the racist housing practices that I've been talking about. It's tied to the discriminatory mortgage lending practices, causing disparities where Black home buyers pay more to buy a home, pay greater in closing costs. They, on average, $7,000 more, pay higher interest rates than their white counterparts. We have a predatory system of tax liens. Again, tax liens are unpaid property taxes or water bills that are then sold to third-party lien servicing companies that can then add more fees and interest to the owner's debt. And these tax liens are disproportionately occur and impact Black communities, allowing private investors to profit from the financial struggles of Black homeowners. The racial wealth gap occurs again through the adverse financial impacts of deed theft and scams, where deed theft is the practice of taking title from someone's home without them knowing. And we see deed theft occurring kind of like the hot spot in Brooklyn, especially, and in the Bronx, and disproportionately targeting and aimed at especially vulnerable Black homeowners who may not have, traditional title to their home, and have that important estate planning, and have their documents in order, and to pass on to their heirs. And that leads to a loss of equity, and that leads or loss of property, and that's then widening that racial wealth gap, because as we know, homeownership is the largest vehicle to equity and to wealth. And so
Right.
by losing that equity, we're then widening that gap, wealth gap.
So your organization actually, has a few solutions, and one of them is free estate planning services. Can you quickly tell me a little bit more about those services?
Well, first, estate planning is the process of designating, who will receive your property at the end of your life, and it's the process of, gathering your wills, your trusts, your healthcare proxies, and designating who will receive your assets and your property. But most important, it's your equity and this protection of your wealth, and protection against these scammers and predatory actors from stealing title from owners and heirs. And so this newly launched Generation to Generation estate planning pilot from the Black Homeownership Project will provide awareness of estate planning and free estate planning services to especially low-income Black homeowners, with the goal of preserving and growing intergenerational wealth in Black households across the city. But more importantly, Generation to Generation will fund nonprofit local housing counselors and legal service providers in the North Bronx and in Central Brooklyn, who will lead in outreach and engagement, as well as in individualized estate planning, to educate and engage Black homeowners on the necessity of doing proactive estate planning, and expand the availability of free estate planning services. They'll do workshop curricula, presentations on what is estate planning, and particularly in Central Brooklyn and the North Bronx.
Thank you so much. So we are at the end of our show. Can you quickly just tell us your social media so people can stay up to date with your organization?
Yes, we're at CNYCN, but also you can look us up at bhp.cnycn.org, or you can call us at 646-786-0888 to learn more.
All right, thank you so much. We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. One organization aims to make a difference in the lives of youth in underinvested communities. New York Edge offers programs designed to enrich and improve several areas of a child's academic success. Joining me to discuss their effort is CEO of New York Edge, Rachel Gastick. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about your organization?
Yeah, New York Edge is the largest provider of after-school programming across New York City. We serve students in all 5 boroughs. And starting this fall, we are also expanding to Long Island. So we reach about 40,000 students in after-school programming. And this summer, particularly in the Bronx, we have 23 schools that we're operating for Summer Rising summer camps, which reaches about 2,000 kids.
And can you tell me the overall mission of your organization and what kind of got you started in this?
Yeah, so I think the overall mission is to ignite kids' intellectual curiosity and really find them where they are and really tune into what a kid's interested in, right? At a very early age, we start to show interest in certain things, whether it be the sciences and robotics and math, whether it's broadcasting. We host our own podcast with middle schoolers called Formative, and we've had really reputable people. Yesterday, we had the president of Disney Network on the show with us. So we're really teaching kids to be broadcasters. We're teaching them to be authors. The children at PS 189 in the Bronx have published their first book that sold out on Amazon and on Barnes and Noble. And they work with professional authors and professional illustrators so that they can see a final product. So when we talk about building kids' skills, whether it's reading, literacy, writing, we want them to see themselves as the next author, the next scientist, the next athlete. And I think we are set up to put them on that pathway. Because if you can't do that here in New York City, I'm not quite sure where you can do it.
Nice. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more just about the wording, because I know when you described your, like online, when you describe your program, you used the term underinvested. And that was kind of the first time I've heard a term like that. So can you explain, why you chose to go with the term underinvested communities or help children in underinvested communities?
Yeah, I mean, it really is important to level the playing field for kids, and I think to bring them the best possible resources we can. So, for example, we have a speed mentoring program for the students. So they speed mentor with kids from Microsoft. They're working with kids, not kids, they're working, I'm sorry, speed mentoring they do with professionals from Microsoft, IBM, apprenticeships. And so what we want to make sure is that you can't be what you can't see. So we want to be able to bring every possible resource to students so that they can excel in whatever their interests are. And that's really important to us at New York Edge.
So those are some really cool programs that you mentioned, but your organization also focuses on health and wellness and self-confidence, which I think is so cool. Why was that important to include that in your programming?
Well, we work with a program called Hip Hop Heals out of Columbia University. And sports has always been at the center of New York Edge. Actually, part of our history is Arthur Ashe wanted to have tennis in all of the schools across New York City. And so we have a sister organization, the New York Junior Tennis League. So sports was part of our founding. But the other part is overall health, physical health and wellness, where kids are eating nutritious foods. We're identifying where food deserts are in various neighborhoods and trying to address those issues. And that's part of our work in collaboration with Hip Hop Heals. And they have different programs like Hip Hop Stroke, Hip Hop Cardio, Hip Hop Diabetes. And they've really engaged hip hop artists to really, talk to kids about ways to eat nutritionally and so forth. We've had some kids lose like 100 to 150 pounds in the program just by getting out there and exercising. And obviously that impacts, how they feel physically, but then also their energy levels to be in school and to really perform at the highest levels like we know that the kids can.
So I think that's really amazing, and I'm so happy that you shared that. Can you explain why you think maybe more student-based centers should focus on non-traditional lessons like health and wellness, or even improving self-confidence in a child?
Yeah, I mean, I think the mental health of our kids is really critical, mental and physical health. And I think we put a lot of time into physical health, but mental health and being proud of who you are, resiliency, strong leadership skills, all of these things are important to students' identity. And we want them to have the self confidence, and we want them to know that anything is possible. And I think our kids are always faced with a lot of challenges, and they need to have the support behind them. And I think New York Edge not only provides the academic and health and wellness, but it's really having adults that you can talk to, and be mentors to you. We hire from the neighborhoods in which our schools are based. And so our kids really connect with our staff on a very different level than you would probably with your teacher or a principal. And I think that's really important for us to wrap around an entire child and family. We have parent advocates in all of our program. We have parents on our board. I think because parents' voice is also really, the family voice is really critical in our programming too.
So I'm so happy that you brought that up because I know that for your organization, diversity and inclusion is like a huge part of that. And you talked about how that could be so important to a child. I think representation is so important, especially for, children in low income communities. So can you expand on that a little bit further on just why it's important for a child to see, someone who kind of looks like them or grew up in the same area as them, in these positions?
I think it's absolutely critical because there's a connection there, and our staff is really the role model for our young people. But also, I would say all of the the book project, for example, is run by an African American gentleman by the name of Jesse Bird, and it's a Black-owned book publishing company. And so the kids see this. He's actually 6'9" when he comes in to the room. So they were more taken by his height. But this really wonderful man who's worked for Google, who's written books, and they see him and they're sitting down and having a conversation with him as they've created the book. And that's important. And all of the illustrators, as another example, were African American, Latino, so on and so forth, so that the kids can see that that's a role you can have as well. And I think our staff really encourage, talking with the students at a level that really reaches them in a deep way to say, look, there's lots of options out there for you, and we're going to help you get there.
Now, you mentioned that, you have all these professionals from places like Google, Disney, and then you also offer, programs in STEM. I think this is so amazing. And I have to admit, I'm a little jealous because I wish I had something like this when I was younger. Now, can you just explain the significance of having this accessible to low income students?
Well, I'll tell you. So most recently, our kids interviewed a child from the Bronx named Kevin. He interviewed Alphabet Rockers, which was nominated for 3 Grammy Awards, and their music is around social justice. And for me, I co-host it, but the purpose of the podcast is so that the kids take it over. And in this particular segment, there was just this connection with the child saying, you're going to be my hero. This was the most moving thing I've ever done. I love learning about how you became who you are. And at the end of this podcast session, we were all like teary-eyed because the student was so moved by having this opportunity. And we just don't realize when we give kids these opportunities how important it is to them, how they hold on to it, and how it makes them know that they can do the next thing. And they can be you, they can be a broadcaster, they can be whoever they would like to be. And that was really important. And this group, the Alphabet Rockers, also performed with our kids at our gala last May. And it was the first time the kids danced since the pandemic. Dance, step is a really big part of our programming, as well as other dances. And so this group professionally their choreographers sent videos so that the kids could learn the moves for the big performance. So we give kids a platform and a stage to be with Grammy-nominated artists. And, there's nothing more exciting than that.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I wish I had something like that when I was younger. Now, many of your accomplishments also include helping these students achieve higher education. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so having been a professor myself for almost 20 years, access for kids to go to college is really important. And for the kids to be college and career ready, and be able to select which pathway they choose to go on. So what we want to make sure is that kids see colleges and universities, not just here in New York, but across the country, that they're matched well with the schools, socially, academically. It has all of the types of programs that they want to be a part of. I think their academic life is important. I also think their social life is important. And I think it's important for kids to go away to school and have that 4-year college experience if that's what they're interested in. So, for example, our high school programs, we're offering the opportunity for kids to go to a place like Syracuse University in their junior year to their summer summer college program, excuse me. And they earn 6 academic credits by the time they're a junior in high school. And so that gives them a 6-week summer experience. So along with all the traditional things that you do, test prepping and so forth, I want kids to really be on the campus, be comfortable there, and really feel connected and excited about where they're going. I think it's one thing to tour a campus. I think it's another thing to really spend time there. Yeah.
So I think that's super amazing. Can you quickly let everybody know how they can learn more about your organization?
Oh, sure. You can go to newyorkedge.org. And you can learn more about us on the website. And if we are in your school in the Bronx, I encourage you to enroll your students. What you would do is just ask your school's principal if New York Edge is in the building.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. I wish you a great summer.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.